Yeah. Thank you. I just had lunch.
Wait, but there's seats right around here. Because you told me to walk this. He wants to
Really sitting here, and so we did talk about those questions, right? Basically, it's like, I don't know, but I will fill you in on the kind of what.
Do you want to
That explains
I'm good. Please, no.
Everywhere. I live in Brent. I have no idea. 40 days before you.
40 days before. Episcopal Church many years ago. And for it's in San Francisco, same thing. And, you know, Fat Tuesday, lots of pancakes, right?
Oh, well, that's what we call it. That's what we call it in England.
Pancake Tuesday.
What do you call it? Well, it's Shrove Tuesday.
Shrove Tuesday,
Yeah. But it's Pancake Tuesday. Oh, they make pancakes. I never figured out why.
Well,
Probably look out. You don't need meat or something.
well, it's a very light, very.
And then once that is, once you made the pancakes,
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi.
Boy, I see a lot of people in masks. This is going to be a very interesting afternoon. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming out to Book Passage on this this is a good place to be today. It's kind of not so nice, but you know, it's nice to be here inside this wonderful bookstore that has been here for 42 years, going on 43.
Wow.
So thank you all for supporting our local independent bookstore. Just checking, anybody new here? Raise your hand. Have
What
ever
do you
been
mean
here?
new?
Never been here.
Oh,
You've been.
I have one.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yay!
Awesome. Yay!
Okay, you can put it back up.
We have a beginner here. Okay, that's great. Well, welcome. In addition to selling great books, we have two stores right here in Corte Madera, one behind each other. We do classes, and we have a store in San Francisco, and of course, where else? Sausalito. Go visit our Sausalito store.
Oh, yeah.
And we do about, I don't know, roughly 800 events a year. So that's like 2 or 3 a day, you know what I mean? So it's great because you get to meet your friend or somebody you've never known before, and you get to find out about the book and how she did it or how he did it, and it's really a wonderful event. And today is no exception. We are really happy to have Iona Mackenzie here for Freefall, a Divine Comedy. This is your 3rd time here. Do I know that? Yeah, 3rd time's a charm, okay? Freefall introduces Tilly Bloom, a wacky installation artist who reconnects with 3 former friends that she knew from the late 50s and 60s. And together they kind of re-acquaint each other. They get more intimate, and they go to Whistler and have a reunion, which turns into planning a 60th celebration in Italy. That is all I will say. Okay, I promise. That's it. No spoiler. And of course, Whistler is probably appropriate because Lily is a Canadian by birth, a high school dropout, and a mother at 17. She'd taken a circuitous path to becoming a published writer. She worked as a stock girl, a long-distance operator, which is a dying breed. There is one. Is there such a thing? No. And a secretary, which is not necessarily is politically correct anymore. What do we say? Executive assistant. Okay, so she was an executive assistant. She also worked as a cocktail waitress at San Francisco's Fairmont Hotel.
Ooh.
Became the first woman to work on the San Francisco docks, and almost got her legs broken. Okay, you have to tell us about that. Founded and managed a homeless shelter in Marin and co-created The Story Shop, a weekly Marin radio program for children and eventually earned 2 master's degrees in her spare time. Okay. Yeah.
Yay!
Wow. Well, this is tough for that. This book is getting really good reviews. People are like Goodreads saying, "I absolutely love it. I couldn't stop laughing." It was a fast like instant grab, instant draw. Her reviews, interviews, short story, poetry, travel pieces, essays, and memoir have all appeared in over 155 American-Canadian venues. She also published her poetry collection, All This, and in the past 4 years, 3 novels, right? Fling, Curva Peligroso, and now Freefall, from which she will read today. She's currently teaching creative writing at USF's From Institute of Lifelong Learning and blogs about writing and reading at lilymackenzie.com. So, how many people know her already? Oh! You should have stopped me. No, that's so great. So thank you for supporting your friend as well. And let's put our hands together.
Wow, I don't know how I follow that up. Maybe stand on my head or something. I did bring, you'll notice there are some people here wearing masks.
Yeah.
And that isn't an accident. Actually, I was going to wear a mask. Okay, Rita's got one on too, great. I was going to wear one if all of my panelists would also, but it didn't work out for them. So I passed them around. So that's the explanation with the mask. But part of it is because 2/3 of Freefall takes place in Venice.
Right.
And Venice is the place of masks and mystery.
Yeah.
So that was supposed to give you a little flavor for that. So let me just get all of my thanks out of the way first. I want to thank everybody for coming. Some of you have been here, or at least been at all of my launches, and I really appreciate your devotion. It's lovely to look out and see familiar faces and friendly faces too. I also want to thank Pinnell Publishing for they published my first novel, Fling, and now for publishing Freefall. And of course, Book Passage. What would we do without this bookstore and without independent bookstores? And Lee Thompson, videographer, you'll see him taking some images from tonight, which we'll post on YouTube, so you'll be able to see yourselves on YouTube too. And then I also have to thank my husband, Michael, who's my first and best reader, as you'll discover in a few minutes as I tell you a little bit more about how this book came into being. And also I want to thank early readers, Mike Shaler, Victoria. They read parts of the book very, very early on and gave me lots of wonderful feedback. So, and then later we're going to have these 3 great visual artists from Point Richmond joining us here because rather than me just reading a passage from Freefall, I'm going to read selected passages that Tilly Bloom, the main character who's an installation artist, things that she had to say about art. And I'm going to get then our 3 guests to comment on Tilly's ideas about art. So let's go. So the evolution of Freefall. Every story has a story. So behind every novel you read, there's another story, and that's the story of how that book came into being. And in much of my writing, I try to answer the question, it's no big deal, what is reality? So that's just one of the main questions that I try to answer. And I also often use art as a way to try and answer the question. And art plays a really big place in Freefall. So as Kathy mentioned, the book features these 4 women who were good friends in their youth, in their late teens. And in fact, I had 3 friends like that in my late teens. And about, I don't know, it was 1999 when my husband and I went to Canada for a trip Eva, my stepdaughter, who is here, came with us, and we went to Whistler and I connected again with two of those women. And after I came home, I wondered what would happen since the four of us, and we called ourselves, we had the presumptuousness to call ourselves the Big Four. Since the four of us did not split up in a good way, there were a lot of bad feelings. I wondered, well, what would happen to those four women if they got together as they're approaching their 60th birthday? And so when I got home, I thought, well, I'll just try and write a story about one of these characters. And I did that, and I showed it to Michael, my first and best reader. And he was intrigued. He wanted to know more about her. He thought it could be a novel. But I wasn't sure that I wanted to go that way. I thought, this kind of a story has been written about before, women's relationships, etc. What can I bring that's new to this? So, and this was September the 6th. I keep, as some of you have come to my events before, you know that I keep notebooks for every novel that I write. I have a conversation with myself in these notebooks about where I'm going, what I know about the characters, etc. And so this was back then in September of 2000. And so I'm saying, I'm back and forth about whether I really want to write about the Big Four or if I should be tackling something else. But then I did some opening pages to what I thought could be the opening of the novel. And I showed them to Michael, and he was amused. He was engaged, and so I wrote to myself. I said, "Well, this gives me permission to dive in." And he had said to me, "Then you don't know what you're going to discover when you start writing," and that's really true. Those of you who write understand that the fun of writing comes in the discoveries that you make once you put pen to page or fingers to the computer, whatever it is. So I was also learning then at the same time how stories unfold for me. And I was slowly, as I was writing, I was discovering who this narrator was, Tilly Bloom, and what her characteristics were, her personality. And so for me, it's in the process of writing that these things happen. I hadn't a clue where this narrative was going. I didn't, other than the seeds that I had from the Big Four, these characters, probably if oh, hi Chris and Sam, grab a seat somewhere. Anyway, if any of the Big Four were to read the novel, they probably wouldn't recognize themselves in it. So, but at least they gave me the seeds to start with. And then when was it? This was December, so I started it in September 2000. In December of 2000, I was upset with myself, and I wrote these notes. I said, I haven't been able to make any progress with this novel in the past week. I feel it's silly. It's not a very good story. But then I just went through all of it I've written so far, and it is a good story. It's interesting, it's evocative, and I'm trying to get to something important, I think. I'm judging it too soon and shutting myself down. So let me just grab some water here, I'm drying out. So those of you who write can understand how that censor can come in and shut you down. Then, in 2001, I wrote that I thought that I had finished the novel, and I was going to start sending it out. I thought, that's all you do. I finished it. I can send it out. And then I printed it out, and I let my first and best reader read it. And he said, it's lively, it's funny, but I think it has the potential of being a deeper, richer book. Push it farther. So, this is 2019, right? This was 2001. You're probably wondering what I have done with this novel in the meantime. It's gone through so many transitions, and I'll warn any of you, if you haven't written a novel, and if you're thinking of doing it, talk to me first. Make sure that you have a lot of time ahead of you, because you're going to need every minute of it. But Michael, again, he said that it's a romp, and he said he accused me of being a scavenger, like ravens or crows that go around taking bits of this and that, and it's absolutely true. Most writers are scavengers, and they are constantly picking up conversations, bits of description, little details that maybe no one else would notice, but they would notice, and then they end up in their work, whether it's poetry or prose. I kept working on the novel through 2008 and even longer, and I something that revived me at that time. I had read a review of Fellini, Federico Fellini's autobiography, that made me understand even better why I want to write the way he makes movies. And what I wrote is the magical, optimistic view he had of life, the tension between sexual urges and religious controls. With Fellini, the fantastic became the norm, with the realistic intruding. And this is what this is what I wrote. This is what I'm trying to do with this book. Capital letters, bold type. Remember this. So I'm hoping that a lot of that feeling comes through in Free Fall. And before I bring up our wonderful panel of visual artists, I just want to give you a brief overview of the four main characters in the book. So I've already mentioned Tilly Bloom. She's an installation artist. She's poor. She has broken up with this photographer that she's had as a roommate and helped pay the rent. So she's sort of on the loose. She only gets money from artist grants that she writes for, and picks up some part-time jobs, cocktail waitressing or whatever. So her life isn't, she's almost 60. She needs something. So that's how the book starts out, with Tilly in this sort of nether world. One of the other characters, Sybil, she's been an accountant. She chain smokes. She drinks a lot of wine, and she's addicted to jigsaw puzzles. And that's her art form. And her husband actually frames them and puts them up on the walls for her. Sybil hasn't been to college, and in fact, none of these other characters have, except for Tilly, it turns out. Moll, she's sort of the nature woman. She loves backpacking in the wilderness. She's also, sort of the super mom, and is really identified with being a mother, conventional mother. And then there's Daddy. Her real name, her given name was Darylyn, but because it was so dull, her friends renamed her Daddy. So Daddy has had sort of a mixed kind of a life. She was involved with the SDS, with other radical groups. She lived in a commune. She tried all the drugs that were around to try. And she also was lesbian, or came out as a lesbian. But then she made this 180-degree turn. Is that right, 180?
Yeah.
Thank you. And she ended up selling real estate. And she was really good at it. She made a lot of money at it. So here we have then these four women getting together. in Whistler for this reunion. And in the book, instead of them being known as the Big Four, they're known as the Four Musketeers. Muskrats are a big deal in Canada. If you've been in Canada, you would know that. So they're the Four Musketeers. So I'm going to now have the pleasure of introducing our three panelists. Ladies, come and join me up here.
That's where our cards are. Dash them around.
So I'm going to start with Nancy Whitley. By the way, about a year ago, I joined the Arts of Point Richmond group and have met some wonderful people there. And this is where I met our three panelists too. So Nancy is a longtime Bay Area resident. She's a photographer. She writes flash fiction. And she says, my quest is to discover the illusion, the reflection, the bare truth, to see the beauty, the irony, the puzzle, and always the detail. Photography and writing are both about capturing the detail. So 15 years ago, she was inspired by her partner, Bob Cullen, who is a former corporate photographer, and she bought her first Nikon camera, and photography overtook writing as her creative passion. So she's exhibited her photography in several Bay Area venues, most recently at the O'Hanlon Center in Mill Valley. Next to Nancy is Penelope Anstruther. I just love to say that name. In my next life, I want to be called Penelope. But I'll let you have it for now. So Penelope is British-born, multidisciplinary artist living and working in Oakland. Her pieces span the range of site-specific installation, printmaking, book arts, collage, photography, and experimental video. She began her art education in Florence, Italy. She then moved to London, completing her foundation year at City and Guilds of London Art School. She achieved the award of Second Student of the Year. I don't know what that means, but I'd like to. Subsequently, she completed a BFA in printmaking at the San Francisco Art Institute. And as part of her degree, spent a year in Osaka, Japan, devoting her study to printmaking. And she has had solo shows in Atlanta, Seattle, and across the Bay Area. So welcome to Penelope. And our last but not least, is Betsy Callis, also known as E.A. Callis. She's a painter, a printmaker, an art educator, and she's lived and worked in the San Francisco Bay Area for several decades. She works in several media, often combining a variety of skills and techniques, including printmaking, painting, collage, and installation. Her work is influenced by her early training as a printmaker, by abstract expressionism, and Dada, and Rembrandt's etchings. Buddhist psychologies also inspire her. Betsy's work has been exhibited internationally and is held in private, corporate, and institutional collections. So I hope I've asked them to bring business cards, and I hope you'll check out their websites. Their work is really extraordinary, but it's visual, and you need to have a chance to look at it. So I'm going to start then with this passage from Free Fall, which will begin our conversation here. And here in this passage, the four women are in Whistler. Tilly's trying to explain to them what she does as an artist because they aren't too up on what artists do. So she had said, just wait, I'm missing a page here. Patience. There it is. So Sybil says, what in hell's an installation? Tilly says, I create spaces you can enter, interiors, you know? Sybil nodded. You always had a knack for decorating. Tilly says, I'm not an interior decorator. I find a lot of different stuff and put it into a new context. Empty rooms, sometimes museums or galleries. Geez, Sybil said, I haven't been to a museum since I can't remember. Me neither, Moll said. Museums bore me, old art and furniture. Tilly says, I usually find abandoned buildings or other structures and play with them, transform them, create stories with objects I find or make. You walk around inside these places and become more conscious of where you are, what you're seeing. Sybil and Moll look a bit dazed, but Daddy was listening intently. Sounds more democratic, Daddy said, more available and less elite. Both Daddy and Tilly went through their 60s civil rights phase together. Daddy went farther in bringing down the system than Tilly had, getting involved with Students for a Democratic Society and other radical groups. Tilly said, I know, not everyone understands the art in museums and not all people get to see it. Installation art breaks down those barriers a little bit. That's radical, Daddy said. Tilly says, maybe. Anyway, the art isn't something plopped on the floor or hung on a wall. It's rooms, spaces, it's what's around you. What's the point, Moll asked. Tilly says, to make people think about their environments, their actions, every situation, even when I'm working at ordinary jobs to earn money, waitressing, cleaning houses, all of that feeds me. I want to get that heightened feeling into my work, make discoveries about things we take for granted. Cool, Sybil said. Watch out though, Tilly says, I use a lot of everyday things in my art. I'm a great collector. Daddy said, you just do installations? Tilly, I've done a lot of different things over the years, drawings, paintings, collage, construction, photography. I bring them into my installations now when I need them. Moll yawned. So what are your pieces about? My themes? They've stayed pretty much the same, mainly political, feminist, autobiographical. Okay, ladies. I'm turning it over to you.
Wow, that's a really rich passage. I mean, there's so much we could talk about there.
So you guys have it. You've got the mic there that you can share. Yeah.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I hardly know where to begin, but one of the thoughts that comes to mind is that Tilly may be being just a little bit unnecessarily defensive about her response to Sybil. And also, I have to say, I think Sybil's question is like perfect. I mean, one hears that so often, and even as an installation artist, sometimes when put on the spot, I find myself sort of reeling and thinking, what the hell is an installation? If I can put this in words. But I think about her saying, I'm not an interior decorator, and yet, installation has a long history. It didn't, it's not a recent form, and decoration has often been a big part of that. And what comes to mind, or came to me, in hearing this, is Michelangelo and Raphael's work in the Sistine Chapel. It's clearly, I mean, there's an element of decoration to it, but I think those artists had to approach those tasks and ask themselves the same questions that installation artists do. What are the physical elements here? What are the limitations? Where can I push those limitations? What is the purpose of this environment? How do I enhance it or detract from it? How do I frame my work? How does this alter my usual practice of whether it's painting or sculpture and what have you? So I think Tilly can say, when maybe questioned about being or suggested that she might be an interior decorator, that, there is a little bit of noble overlap in that. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I wanted to think about the really wonderful installation art that we have experienced in the Bay Area. what's considered to be the first radical feminist installation piece with Judy Chicago's
Right.
The Dinner Dinner
Yes.
Party.
Oh, yeah.
And then Christo's Running Fence
Right.
was, that really got us all who were there, who got to see that, thinking about the environment.
Not a
and,
wall.
And the wall.
Yeah, and it was incredible. And then the Ai Weiwei
right.
in Alcatraz,
Yes.
to me was just a incredible, powerful study about political prisoners.
Yes.
I spent hours there with my camera. It was really, really amazing. And then there's Burning Man
Oh, yeah.
every year. Gobs of installation art.
Right.
So it has been from the 90s on a real integral part of modern art.
Yes.
Well, I think, yeah, it just takes so many different forms, and I can kind of get behind some of Tilly's like site-specific focus. For me, I like to go to a place, and then the place informs the work, and then that informs the objects that are picked up, and then that informs the end result of the installation. Yeah, so I can.
Super. Anyone want to add anything?
Oh, gosh.
We could talk.
Yeah.
She, at one point, she talks about how in installation, I think she says, we make discoveries about things we take for granted.
Right.
And I think, not only the things we take for granted and discoveries about them, but discoveries about our relationship to them. And the way in which installation is different from sort of what we think about when we imagine walking into a traditional museum or gallery where you encounter each discrete
Right.
work, and often they're framed so that to hold your focus, to have this moment with this piece of work, and then to move on to the next piece of work and the
Right,
next
and
piece
to
of
ignore your surroundings.
and to ignore your surroundings. Yeah, I mean, that is sort of the purpose of the frame, to not think about what's around it and to capture your attention for those moments. And installation is in fact invites you to absolutely not only think about your surroundings, but to understand that you are looking at yourself, looking at those things, that you in fact are a participant in that. And I think the most successful installations are those where, like Ai Weiwei's piece, where you're there, and one of the powerful things about it is you're all at once both watching this like a voyeuristically in a way, but at the same time you're at a deep level experiencing a little bit of what that confinement is like. I mean, you get that little bit of anxiety going, and then you kind of watch yourself getting anxious, watching yourself, and it's that full on in the present, in the space, direct experience and immersion in something that someone else has created in an artificial environment, essentially. Artificial in the best sense.
I wanted to ask Nellie a question. She being the installation artist, my assumption, and you should never assume things like this, is that installation art is a difficult form to actually find venues, and it doesn't make you a lot of money unless you're somebody really rich and famous already. And so I was curious that Tilly was mainly an installation artist, a starving installation artist, and I wanted to know, Nellie, if
Are you starving?
I know you're not starving. I know you're not starving, but and you have all sorts of aspects of art that you deal with, but is it really difficult to deal with your art, trying to get shows, or, you know, venues to
I
do your
got you.
installations? Yeah.
Well, it's not like lots of people don't want that because it isn't sellable at all, really. It's very hard to sell an installation. Mostly people want to buy one little part of it. And you mostly make money doing the commission work, which is also really infrequent because it's a big commitment to live with such a big piece. I mean, I don't make money off my work. I work like 5 jobs.
So maybe I'll take over here, because Tilly, one reason they end up in Venice is because Tilly has still hopes of making her mark as an artist. And she has plans. The other women aren't quite aware of this, what she has on her mind, but she plans to crash the Venice Biennale. And so early on, when they're in Whistler, she starts taping their voices, and she makes models of their bodies, and she's already begun sort of thinking about and putting together this installation that she's going to crash Venice with. And she does find a place in Venice, I won't tell you where, but where she does end up constructing her installation. So that leads us to Venice, and this is a short passage from the book about Venice. Venice itself reminded Tilly of a huge installation in process, parts appearing and disappearing, depending on the light and time of day, so much expressed in reflection, the water both a mirror and the source of the city's life, ghostly, neither totally real nor imaginary. Like all great art, inviting viewers to participate and reconsider their basic assumptions about cities, making them more conscious of themselves and their relationship to Venice. Okay, ladies, what's your take on that?
Well,
And
I'm the photographer, and I have to agree with the description of Venice here. It is a magical city that has tinges of sadness to it, and I particularly liked the use of the word reflection, because it's not just being the mirror and the source of something, the water, but the ghostly part of it is that psychological reflection of mortality. And you go to Venice, it's visually just exquisite because of the light and the water. But then, like we are, it's going away.
Yes. Any other thoughts?
It's an interesting idea, that the city as installation, and you know, it can be subtle. It can also kind of go to the extreme. I don't know if any of you have had the experience of visiting a place from, God forgive me, but I'm going to use the example of Santa Fe, and there are other places, parts of New York City, Manhattan, where you go to, and you almost feel like you're in a theme park of the place, not really the place. And it's those levels of reality and artifice that can become so mysterious and kind of disturbing and interesting all at once. And the role of commerce and the role of art, and how do they overlap and combine. You know, it's a very interesting business. And then Venice, of course, is just so beautiful. It's just so beautiful. Then that ghostly images, I mean, all those things, working at all those levels, that it's just tough to wrap your head around it. You want to love it, and you do love it, and you're suspicious of it at the same time. And it's a fascinating thing to have to, I don't know how you put it in words. I don't know how you put it in those words.
Okay. Did you have anything you wanted to add? So, in this next short passage I'm going to read, I have to explain. I mentioned earlier that Tilly had had a roommate. His name was Frank, and he was a photographer. And he loved taking photographs of Tilly. He took photographs of every part of her body, but he didn't put them all together into one picture. They were all individual shots, okay? So here is then Tilly saying that at the time she didn't question Frank's photographs of herself, giving her all for art, though she began to feel fragmented, chopped into pieces by the precision of his camera techniques. An eye here, a toe there. It was creepy, like living with a killer whose preferred method was chopping up his victims. It was an aspect of art she hadn't noticed before, the bond between artist and subject and the created object, the damage that could be done in the process. Have you guys ever thought about the damage that's happening as you're creating art?
Well, I don't do a lot of portraitures, and when I do have parts of, body parts, but so I can't really talk about Frank, or Tilly's reaction to being carved up like that, fragmented. But Frank joins, a host of photographers who've done body parts, and like Imogene Cunningham, Ruth Barnard, and Edward Weston. And when I was reading this, I
Yeah. The work by the J or later turns the outside by virtue.
Yes, we'll let you.
It uses the whole outside.
I know. I feel like, oh.
Faces, places.
Oh.
The one with,
I think they're We'll make it. All right. The Lion King lady.
Yeah. But actually, they're doing that in Germany. They're selling I didn't understand the necessity. It was only done in 88.
This was in the paddle, and the gallery window was open.
No.
Artificial.
No, not yet. I was just gonna say, what's your name?
Do you want any of those?
Okay, I just get.
You want to visit
Oh,
those?
good, sure.
I just saw the book passage thing. I'm on the eve of my 60th and had young kids. And we're reconnecting.
I'd love to see. Actually, there was a philosopher.
Sure. I'm not
Exactly. Not just
Marco.
Just bring in some.
So what Barbara sent me and